Hi, everybody. It's Toni Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. And I think if you follow us at all, whether it be on audio through Apple or iHeartRadio, or you follow through YouTube, you know that I'm just an obsessive reader, and I love books and I love having authors on the show. And so I'm excited today that we have an author by the name of David Richman, and I hope he's going to get into his book with us right now. So let me introduce David Richman to the podcast.
Hi, Toni. Nice
Hi.
to meet you. Nice to talk to you. I have a couple of friends that are authors you've spoken to before. I love them and the way that you interview. So I'm excited to talk to you.
Oh, and I'm likewise excited to have you here. And we should probably give a shout out, I guess, to I think your manager, Erin. So we'll give her a shout out, who was lovely to me and I had a good experience with. So hi, Erin.
Oh, thank you. You fellow attorneys are so smart. I love it.
Thank you. So now your book, it's a really touching book. And what I liked about it, I mean, it's called Cycle of Lives. And for those of you who haven't read it, it really covers a period of time. I think your sister passed away of brain cancer in 2007. And I'm sorry, very sorry.
Thank you.
And at some point after that, you had this journey. And I use that in two ways. You had this journey emotionally and a journey physically. So you ultimately decide to go on a bike ride that will help generate money for different cancer-related causes. But also, if you read the book, there's this intense emotional journey you have in dealing with the loss of your sister and how it happened. And you're kind of standing amongst the ruins at that point, trying to figure out which direction to go in. And I felt that bike ride, just as it had its purpose in earning money and the like, it had its purpose for you too. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And the funny thing, Toni, is that it didn't, the story almost didn't, my story almost didn't come out. So for authors out there, you know that like you can write, but what makes a book good is the editing, right? Your editors is what makes the book any good. And I originally set out, as you know, Toni, to interview like a wide range, very diverse, inspiring people, and wanted to tell the raw emotional story of their the cancer journey, but from the emotional side, right? Like how did traumas affect their ability or inability to navigate the emotions of the cancer experience? And so I end up going on a bike ride where I'm going to meet the people for the first time. I'd spoke to them for a couple of years and I'm doing whatever. So I come back, I write the book. And it's so funny, Toni, because every single one of the people I interviewed said, "Oh, all right, I'll talk to you, but my story's not that interesting. Nobody will want to hear it, but all right, whatever, I'll talk to you." So I send the book off to my editor and she sends it back and she's like, "Yeah, this is not going to work." She goes, "You put yourself into everybody's story when you're interviewing them. Their lives are not about you and your life is not about them. Pull yourself out of their stories and write your story in between." And I go, "Yeah, but my story's not that interesting. Nobody's going to want to hear about it." She's like, "That's so funny because that's what you told me. Everybody told you." She goes, people do want to know about your story. They want to hear how you were able to deal with the emotional side, just like the people that you wrote about, like, right. So I said, okay, I'll include that. So I almost didn't, but I'm glad that I did, because I did go through a very, pretty emotional journey and really came to some hardcore, acceptances of some realities that were in my life that I hadn't processed, and I hadn't gone there. And so writing about it allowed me to go there.
Sure. And I think what I was very attracted to about your book, and is different than a lot of the other books out there on this topic, is that you took so many perspectives. As you indicate, you interviewed people along the way. So you're taking this journey via bike, and you're trying to generate money. but you're stopping along the way and you're interviewing people, but at all phases along the cancer journey. So you talk to, survivors of it. You talk to family members from the perspective of loss and grief. You talk to, medical professional, right? In terms of how does it feel to be, that person in their journey, to in some cases deliver very bad news, and in some cases make a difference. And I think probably the hardest thing is knowing there isn't much that they can do, because I thought you did capture the fact that it's very formula oriented, rinse and repeat, in terms of like, well, this is the protocol for this is what we do. And there's just like this repetition to that. And so you really came at it from all different angles, and I thought it was fascinating.
Thanks. I was kind of called to it because when my sister passed away, she had committed to doing this like 24-hour Relay for Life thing. She had a whole team, big thing put on by the American Cancer Society. She had a team of people that were there to support her, and she was pretty much at the end of the line, and I didn't think she'd have the strength to do it. And the fact that she committed to wanting to be out watching people for 24 hours, raise money for her in this one little 24-hour event, I was really touched. And I said, well, I'll run the whole 24 hours if you're going to be sitting there for the whole 24 hours. And so she passed away a couple of days before, which was really unfortunate. She didn't get to see all the love and support that was there for her. But I did. And I noticed that I wasn't the only one. And not everybody like me was the only one. Everybody, when it came to the emotional side of it, Toni, they were just isolating. They went inward, they went quiet, they went dark, because we're good about talking about the tasks of the cancer. And I guess that's the way it is with most trauma, is you just want to like triage, you want to deal with, the tasks of things. But when it comes to how do you feel about it, or how are you able to process, your ups and downs, or, talk to me about your fear, your anxiety, your happiness, your regret. Talk to me about these things. Are really hard subjects to talk about. And so I was called to it. And I thought the only way that I could bring some light onto the subject was to do exactly what you just said, which is to hit as many perspectives as I could, doctor, patient, loved one, survivor, caregiver. But I couldn't relate to their cancer journeys, but what I could relate to is the traumas that they had in their lives growing up, abuse or abandonment, making bad decisions, drug addiction, suicide, you name it. I can understand those. I can wrap my brain around those things, because who doesn't have trauma that they're dealing with or, intimately understand? And then I thought, well, if I could really get into their traumas and kind of what's setting the stage for what kind of turmoil they're bringing to this thing called cancer, then maybe I could get some insight into how to better connect with them while they're going through the emotional side of the cancer journey, no matter what it is, doctor, patient, whatever. And so that's what I was called to do. So I had to find diverse, interesting, evocative, young, old, cancer one and done, cancer their whole life. I wanted to just get a 360 view of it. And I just felt compelled to do that. Like you, I'm a reader, and I love books, and I'm reading one book now about a woman's cancer journey, stage 4 colon cancer. Really interesting story, but hard for me to super identify with, because it's her story. Right. If it was 15 different stories or 20 different stories, I go, oh, now I get it. Like I get all these different perspectives, and so that's what I tried to bring, to light, is not just be inspired by my story and see what you can take from it, but I wanted to give a 360 view of everyone's, quote unquote, everyone's story.
Well, I do think the one thing that it truly captured for me is the uniqueness that cancer brings into everyone's life, right? I myself am a survivor, and listeners of the podcast will know that too. You've heard me mention it before. And it's very unique as to how you experience, sitting in the room and hearing those words, experience the journey from beginning to end. And I thought you captured that really, really well, because no person receives that identically to another person. I think there are common threads, of course, that, you can help somebody with. You can sit and have a conversation with someone and say, yeah, I experienced this and this is how I dealt with it. But certainly, I think everyone's journey is very unique. And in its own way, I like that Chris Wark says, it was a divine tap on the shoulder for him, and I agree very much. It felt that way to me as well, to make some significant changes in my life. And I think that it's that for everybody, to get their attention, and the experience is different. And I liked that you captured the different experiences, because it wasn't just one person's story. And I do think that cancer affects not only the person who's going through it, but as you say, the person caretaking, the person watching a loved one, maybe in the end losing a loved one, and the medical professionals treating. I mean, everybody has their own experience with it, and I really liked that you assemble this collection of stories. And I want to say it was about 16 people, 15 people that you spoke to, something like that. And these collection of stories, the uniqueness comes through. I also loved that you had a really great line in there that something along, I'll paraphrase because I don't remember it exactly, but that we're seldom the people that other people think we are. And sometimes we're not even the people we think we are.
That's exactly what I said. Right? That's exactly what I said. Thank you for remembering it. It's such a powerful thing, because I'm not a big fan of like trite sayings, or like, oh, just put on a smile and go about your day. Like, I don't understand that stuff. Right. But so if you just take a minute to just take a deep breath and connect with someone in an authentic, true, listening way, you're looking at it, you're feeling each other, you're there. If you do that, if you're lucky enough to do that, you're going to be blown away by what that person is going through, or what they have gone through, the things that have affected them, the things that might still be affecting them that you would have no idea about. And it was just something that touched me. I tell you a super quick story. Right around the time when my sister had just passed away, and there was a big financial crisis going on, and it's like I was going through this big change on myself. I had gotten out of a really bad, kind of a violent marriage, and got me and my kids to safety, and it's like I had all this stuff going on, and I was managing an office of about 50 financial advisors. Okay. Knew them all very, very well. Had been to weddings, funerals, barbecues with the kids or whatever. Anyway, during the height of the financial crisis, one of our advisors took his own life. It was absolutely horrible and just tragic. And we couldn't get a grief counselor in quick enough. So I said, okay, David, you're the boss. Go in there and start talking to people. And Toni, I went into the first person's office and I said, oh my God, can you imagine? And he told me a story that just brought tears to my eyes of something that happened in his childhood related to suicide. Oh my God. I walked out and I went to the next office, the same thing. And the next office, every single office, somebody had a story, first person, of something that tragic like that had happened in their life, and it brought up these feelings and emotion and what happened today. And I was just like, by the end of the day, Toni, I was like, what the hell? How did I not know any of this of anybody? Because we're so good at keeping our trauma to ourselves, to isolate it, to keep it, just hidden and deal with it, because we don't want to be weak, or we don't want to make other people feel guilty, or we don't want to burden people, whatever the reasons are. A lot of that stuff is quiet. And I mean, obviously, especially when it comes to things like needing help or self-care, those kind of things, that's when you should be talking to people, but we just don't. And so that's what really drew me to this. It's like this confluence of events that was like, man, I want to know exactly what you just said. Like who is it that I'm talking to? What's allowing them or not allowing them to talk to me and connect with me? Because isn't that what life's all about, is making these true, authentic, deep connections, if only with a few people, but at least we want them to be as deep and real as possible. And in order to do that, we got to find out who they really are.
True. And that, I think what what really resonated for me, that, we're seldom the people even that we think we are. Sometimes I think we sell ourselves short. We think that we couldn't possibly endure or get through something that we can. And I think that really resonated for me. And I think that's why I remembered the line. And also that other people assume they know us. Other people that, that you may have in your life assume that they just know who you are. And they don't always know who you are, or what you're capable of. And I really thought, wow, that line kind of jumped off the page for me.
Well, thanks. I mean, look, I'm positive every single person out there listening, some points in their life, if not constantly in their life, they walk into a room full of people and people have no idea who they are and what they've gone through, right? No idea, right? I mean, I kind of laugh at it, but at one point in my life, Toni, I was 18 years old, nobody to call. I was homeless. I had 56 cents in my pocket, right? And I was absolutely at the end of my rope. I didn't know what to do or where to go or who to call or whatever. I'm completely out on my own. I'd just been robbed with a gun in my head of everything that I owned. I had nobody call, and I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? I'm 18 years old, right? But I'm like 12. I'm 18 going on 12. And I'm at the lowest point anybody could ever be, at least, from my situation. And somehow I get out of it and whatever, and I am where I am. And people go, oh, like you're so privileged and you had such an easy life, and and I'm sitting there going, like, you have no idea. I do know what it is like to be threatened at gunpoint and robbed of everything that you own and have nobody to call and living out of your car for a few days. Yeah, I do know what that's like. Right now, I don't carry it as a burden. I'm not cynical. There's no chip on my shoulder, but I know that there's very few people. Well, there's a few more now that know that, but there's very few people that know that. And it's like, it's part of who I am. And if you're going to connect with me, you can't say, oh, you've never really had difficulty in your life. Like, that's not going to allow us to connect, because if you only knew.
Exactly. Wow. Very well said. True. Seldom do people know the journey that brought us to the point we are in our life. And I think it also leans towards lack of assumption. You should never assume that you know somebody, that you know where they're coming from, and that you know who they are, because maybe something else is going on. Sometimes I like to say, like, where's the victory? People will say, well, why didn't you, say this nasty thing back? And I like to say, well, where's the victory in that? Right. So I could have maybe hurt them back, but I don't see the victory there. And I think that you do have to look at life from the perspective of, I really don't know what brought you here today to this mood that you're in, or to this point in your life. And you probably should take a step back when you feel that knee-jerk reaction to say or do something that is questionable. You probably should take that step back and say, I really don't know this person or where they're coming from. Because I guarantee, if I froze your moment in time and I told you they had a spouse at home in stage 4 of cancer, they were about to lose their house, and they didn't know where they were going to go with their kids, you would have let that remark slide by.
You're so right. It's a very humbling and sobering thought to know that. And the thing is what this journey on this book has done for me is it's given me a better appreciation to understand that each person's life and each person's traumas and each person's emotional responses to the things that they've been through are valid and unique and their own, and they shouldn't be mine because mine aren't theirs. Right. I serve on the board of a adolescent young adult cancer organization based in New York, and they have this wonderful mantra that says basically, we don't judge. Like, your stage 0 is just as traumatic to you as my stage 4 is to me, right? So I mean, not me personally, I don't have cancer, but what I'm saying is that we don't judge, right?
Right.
Because I can't judge if something that I could handle and you didn't. Does that make me better or worse? No, it just makes me able to handle something you weren't, and vice versa. You probably handle things that I never could handle. And so it really is a sobering thought to know that. It's hard in practice to do it, because when somebody runs a red light and almost crashes into you and you scream at them, you're like, well, maybe they did that because they were racing in the hospital. I mean, you don't know.
Right.
But it's hard to live it, but it is a sobering and really contemplative spot if you can keep in the front of your mind that people are just living their lives. Most people are doing the best they can. Most people are dealing with or have dealt with things that we wouldn't have any idea how they're dealing with it. And because everybody does, nobody lives a charmed life. And it does give you an opportunity, should that case arise, for you to be able to connect with them in a really meaningful way. If you lead with that, if you understand that, if you have that in the center of your heart, to know that people are going through a lot, right? Even if they're not showing it.
Agreed. Why don't you tell a little bit about your personal journey?
So my journey with specifically with this book was, I had, like I said, I was a pretty low point in my life in my late 30s. I needed to change. I never really, I like to tell people, I had learned a lot of lessons in life. I just never applied any of them to myself. Right? I was good at telling other people how to apply lessons I learned, but I never applied them to myself. And I finally just one day I looked in the mirror, Toni, and I said, like, who are you and who do you want to be? Like, you're not doing anything you want to do. You're not accomplishing anything you want to accomplish. You're not living a meaningful life. You think you're made for greater things, and you're all you're doing is just fixing problems. And it's some of those I created, but all I'm doing is fixing problems, not dealing with my own stuff. And so I just purposely decided to go on a journey of discovery. And so I took an honest assessment of who I was, and I just forgave myself for not being more than where I was, or not having accomplished more, or being a better person, or being happier with myself. I just forgave myself and said, okay, from today forward, let's see what the journey leads you to. Then that's the same time that my sister tells me, yeah, I got terminal brain cancer. So her journey is to end life. So we got that dynamic going on. And I just started doing endurance athletics, stopped smoking, lost weight, started to become active, started doing, tons of endurance athletics, 50-mile runs and Ironmans and 100-mile runs and whatever, and got myself into kind of a really good mental place, because for me, endurance athletics was very meditative and very really helped me it was very transformative for me, really helped me emotionally, physically, psychologically, answered a lot of questions, showed me a lot of things to learn, and let me apply some of the lessons to myself. And when June died, I was pretty good about feeling like we had dealt with her death, and like I'd pretty much grieved it, was fine. But I found out through this project that I didn't need to grieve her death. That was already done. What I needed to grieve was the one person that knew me as a kid and knew the problems that I had as a kid. And you've talked to people who've lost parents, and whatever, kids, and every situation is unique. I think with siblings, especially if it's just the two of you, we had a pretty rough childhood.
Right.
The thing that I didn't know I needed to grieve, but I found out along the bike ride that I needed to grieve, was the one person that knew my troubles as a kid. And that person was never going to be able to hear about it and tell me it's going to be okay and understand me.
Commiserate and
Mm-hmm.
and understand where you've been.
Yeah, no better, no worse. No, it's just different than other people that lose people. I can't imagine, losing a spouse or a child or a best friend, or those each come with their own, a special a sprinkling of tragedy. But yeah, that's what I needed to do. And I've dealt with a lot of sibling groups and talked to a lot of cancer organizations who focus on that, because it shouldn't be minimized either. It's not a loved one. It's not, I mean, it's not a spouse, it's not a child, it's not a parent. It is a sibling, but it can be just as traumatic, right?
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Sure. As I said, that's a person in the world who can commiserate with you like no one else,
Hmm.
right? That sibling, that person who's been there before you became, who you are, who remembers you, falling on your bike and looking and saying rather stupid things, and who's been there, who
Yeah.
remembers, you from the kind of the start. So I agree.
Yeah. And
Losing that person is wow. I mean, that person, no matter what is happening to you in your life, you kind of always have that expectation that they are laterally following along with you.
it's such a smart statement, because what I was going to say is, I don't know if you read Dr. Myers' story, but Dr. Myers is a oncologist at NYU, and the Perlmutter Cancer Institute. And I interviewed her about her journey, because her journey is amazing, completely amazing. And a couple of things I left out of the book, but one that has never left me, is that she told me one time, she goes, like, the human brain's just not wired to understand its own mortality. Like, even as doctors, she says, part of the reason I became an oncologist is the reason that other oncologists became oncologists, because we figure it's going to give us karma and we're not going to get cancer and die. Like, we can't wrap our brains around the fact that we're going to die. And I think when just piggybacking on what you just said, Toni, is that you have these parallel lives together. And if a sibling dies, then you're kind of like, oh shit, that means I'm going to die at some point too. Oh, it's like you can wrap your brain around it just a little bit more,
I get it. And you talk a little bit in the book, about the lack of communication, I guess, between you and your sister's relatives and the impact that had on you.
Oh, yeah. I rarely talk about that, Toni, and it is a black hole of understanding. It's just something I just don't understand, and I don't know that I ever will understand it. It's just some people deal with their trauma in unique ways, and that's the only thing I can do, is just go, okay, they're dealing with it in the way they need to deal with it.
And I think that was important about what you said, because we don't always understand why others do what they do. And I guess in some ways it's not for us to understand.
Yeah, when I sometimes feel bad. So basically, in short order, for anybody that's listening, is that my sister and I were pretty close. She was really close to her husband and kids. I mean, and his family. They had a wonderful circle of friends and family and whatever. And she was very, very happy. And when she passed, yeah, they just shut down, like didn't talk to me. I was doing fundraisers in June's honor, never got a call, never got a letter, never got a, hey, that's cool, or can we be a part? Never responded to nothing. Like I just think they dealt with her loss by just not allowing anybody outside of that circle. And I was outside of that circle because I wasn't, directly in it, to not exist. And so it was just very odd. And I think, like, there's a story in my book about a woman who, if you told me this ahead of time, I never would have believed you. And I would have just said, well, there's something else going on. And I'm not to know what it is. Like he just said, I'm not to know what's going on with this family. That this other story that makes me think that is in contrast is I was introduced to her story by a friend of mine who said, yeah, so let me tell you about my friend. She was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and husband and 6 kids and whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's tragic. I go, yeah. She goes, can you imagine that she was told that she's got terminal cancer, and she's got to go into surgery and have a tumor removed that might kill her. And she started crying tears of joy. And I'm like, shut up. Like it's not even possible. Like that's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard, right? That doesn't happen. There's more to the story. Of course, there's more to the story. In her case, I found out what the more to the story was. In my case, with why they won't talk to me or have never reached out or never responded, I just don't know the answer.
Yeah. It's, that's hard. I think even more difficult to not know, to always wonder. But I thought it was an important thing to highlight because I do believe in life. Sometimes, we are left, I guess, hanging and don't know. And sometimes we never find out the story for different things. And I think acceptance and being able to let go is such an important part of being mentally healthy in life. So I just wanted to, touch upon that.
Well, thank you, Toni, for bringing that up, because one of the common themes in most of these stories is some amount of abandonment or isolation. And, just people, we know people in our lives that we have avoided because we don't want to step on their toes. We don't want to get involved. We don't want to be where we're not supposed to be, whatever. And we just kind of we just keep our distance from them. And sometimes the person that we're keeping a distance from is sitting there going, why is everybody keeping their distance from me? Right? Yeah. Why am I being abandoned? And sometimes you just can't figure it out. Right. One of my stories, could you imagine being in a taxi on your way to being checked into a bone marrow transplant and your fiance calling you on the phone saying, yeah, you're on your own, I'm out of here. Right. Could you imagine that? There's not even a world I could imagine that, but that's how sometimes abandonment happens in trauma, and there's no answer for it. And it's never, and all you can do is shake your head at it and go, I'm never going to know. Who could ever do that? Who could ever do something like that? Right.
Agreed.
So it's just, the one good thing you can take from all of that is anybody who's going through trauma or has gone through trauma, who has felt abandoned or has self-isolated and then felt it difficult to reach out. There's that space, that difference, we're each created in these own little islands, right? There's that happens to everyone. What I'm hoping that this book will do is build a few bridges between those islands. Like, oh, maybe I understand what somebody might be going through. I understand what maybe they have gone through, and it maybe might empower me to connect with them in a more authentic, real, connective, emotional way. That's what I'm hoping.
And I think it validates, everyone's experience in a way that, I can't really think of another book that does that, right? Mm-hmm. There's certainly books that I've read that deal with individual stories, individual journeys, but I really liked the compilation because I felt like it validated everyone's experience and didn't minimize, because I think as a society, we do tend to minimize anything. We judge it and then we minimize that which we haven't deemed, to be of an acceptable level of importance. And I thought that your book really put some chinks in that, put some chinks in the armor of that filtering thing that we all tend to do.
Yeah, it's really well said. And, I've learned a lot from doing the book, right? The book is not prescriptive, right? It doesn't say, hey, do this, do that, do this, but I learned a lot of lessons in the book, and definitely one of those lessons is to remove the words "at least," because we do tend to minimize it. You got cancer. Well, at least it's not terminal. Oh, you lost your leg because of your cancer. Well, at least you still have your health, right? oh, you lost your sister. Oh, that's a bummer. Well, at least you had 3 or 4 years to talk to her about it. Take "at least" out, because it is even if not with intent, it is somewhat natural for us to minimize what somebody else is going through, unless we just sit back and go, oh my God, there's no way I could have ever dealt with that, because that's just the most tragic thing I've ever heard. But even that's kind of minimizing it, because how do you already assume what the other person's going through, right? So
agreed. I think that's exactly, as a humanity, what we tend to do. We do tend to minimize. We tend to kind of judge other people's experiences and oftentimes minimize unless we feel you've gotten to the highest level.
And in this case, the highest level of trauma or tragedy or emotion. And you know what, it's just, it really is, I'll say it again, I'm sorry if I'm repetitive, Toni, but it really is a humbling thing to really have people. I had people that I spoke to for like 2.5 years and had never met them in person. I didn't do any Zoom or video because I really wanted them to feel safe to talk to me on the phone. And the things that they opened up about, every single one, Toni, multiple times said, oh, okay, I'll tell you about this, but I've never really told anybody. And I'm just like, whoa. I wasn't able to do that with everyone. Otherwise, the book would have been 30 stories. But the people that where we were able to go as deep as possible, and you pick another layer and another layer and another layer to get to the core. It's just amazing the stuff that people have gone through and that they deal with. It's just amazing. And most people, well, you know what? I'm just living my life. Like, it's not that interesting. It's not that difficult. It is what it is, whatever. But then if you really take a look, you don't minimize it. You're just like, wow, you're blown away by it. And if we could just I'm not even going to go as far as a society. If we could just in our circles and the people we want to connect with really understand that to its highest level, that man, oh man, have people gone through a lot or are going through a lot. So let's just sit back. Let's not judge. Let's not assume. Let's not minimize. If we want to connect with them in a deep way, man, that thought is as true as it could ever be.
And in some instances, the best thing we can do is sit beside a person, right? Some instances, there's nothing you can say and no words that are truly going to be healing. I think to offer that, just your companionship, your silent companionship is a gift.
Oftentimes, Toni, and you know this, is more than anything they could say, because oftentimes, what could you say to make it better? There isn't words to make it better. There isn't. Just to know that somebody's there is sometimes way more than anything that they could say. Because how am I going to make it better with words? I don't know what's going on with you. And even if I did, I couldn't make it better with words. But just like you said, just to be there, non-judgy, I'm not here to fix it. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to make it better. Nothing. I'm just here for you. It's hard to do. It's hard to do.
Oh yeah, agreed. Very hard to do. But in practical purposes, sometimes that is the best thing you can do for a person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you talk in your book about it, Dr. Plotnick, his wheel of emotion. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So when I was observing people, and I was drawn to this, not as a science project, but just I was drawn to it. Like Chris, I know Chris, he's a wonderful guy. And, like he said, he was touched, right? You just, sometimes you're drawn to things. One of the things that I was drawn to was just the range of emotion that people had. And, it's shocking because if you think about it, like anybody falls off a boat and gets stuck underwater and is underneath the boat and doesn't know which way to go, there's not a person alive that's not going to feel fear. Okay, that we have these basic human emotions, and they're, Dr. Plotnick, he kind of had this wheel of emotion. Like we all have these 8 emotions, 4 opposite each other, and they're based on our survival instincts, and really that's about it. And I thought to myself, yeah, but when it comes to trauma, like it's not that simple, like it's just not. And I mean, okay, I'm not writing a book about people falling under a boat and trying to find their way out, because everybody can feel the fear. Or if you're in a cave and you hear a bear, yeah, you're going to run. Every single person is going to be afraid. But when it comes to trauma, man, some people handle it and some people don't. Some people are grateful. Some people are angry. Some people are fearful. Some people are anxious. I mean, it's all over the place. And I wanted to understand, if we don't have the same emotional responses, then how are we going to know how to connect with people? We gotta get to the heart of their emotional response, which oftentimes is affected by other traumas in their life. You know, if you're a very good swimmer, you fall under that boat, you're going to be less fearful than somebody that doesn't know how to swim, right? So,
Right.
that's what I wanted to do is to really understand if people have different, which they do, everybody has a different emotional response to the trauma. What is it that causes them to have that emotional response? And what is it then that allows them to deal with or not deal with each other on an emotional level about the issues that they're going through? And that just drew me. And it goes to everything we've talked about, right? Not to minimize, not to assume, not to try to try to understand what people have already gone through without talking to them. And then, oh, now if I can really take a view, on like I got one of those maps where you got to unfold it 10 times, lay it out on the table. Oh, now I get the big picture. Now I can see how to get from point A to point B. Right. But until we do that, we just don't know, because everybody has such different emotional responses to the things that they've gone through.
Yes, that's all true. I mean, I don't want to put too many spoilers out there, and I'm trying to touch upon your book without getting into too many people's stories, because I think that would ruin the experience. If you read the book and you read the stories, you'll be sucked in, because every story is just as touching and valid in its own way. And I thought, again, put together really well. But I do think there was this theme that kind of just kept weaving its way through.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that. It's different. Like, if you're going to write a book about your story, you don't have to do such a great job, right? Because it's your story. If you screw up, what are you going to do? You're not going to beat yourself up,
Yeah.
right? If you're writing a story that's made up about a bunch of people, well, okay, there's nobody on the other side that's going to go. But I'm writing real stories about real people, and I'm talking about the death of their parent or their spouse, or I'm talking about how they were an oncologist for 40 years, or a medical professional, or some kind of a nurse, and I'm talking about really, really intimate things that they've talked to me about. So I'm writing these stories out. Man, Toni, when I had to send them, the stories ahead of time, and when I sent them the story ahead of time and waited for them to tell me yes, no, or suggest changes, that was one of the most anxious, stressful things ever, because I felt like it was such a responsibility, granted when I wanted, but it was such a responsibility to take such care of the accuracy and the essence of these stories, because these were real people's stories, real lives. That made me, it made me an extra level of urgency and a sensitivity and accountability to do the right thing with regards to the story. So the one, I'm not good at too many times like pointing a finger at myself, but one of the things I'm really proud about is everyone eventually, if not right off the bat, was just like, you got me, you did it. And so the stories are as true and authentic and real and raw and inspiring, without being fake. They're the real thing.
One of the things I was going to actually ask you about is the burden you must have felt to do each story justice.
There's Jen's story. Jen's story is a wonderful, oh my gosh, she's such a wonderful person. She's pregnant with her second child now. Her and her husband, he's an attorney too, wonderfully happy. And her story, she's a pediatric oncology nurse, and only went into nursing because when she was a very, very little girl, her father was dying of cancer, and at home hospice, he would say, "Oh, hey, Nurse Jen, like, can you bring me a straw? Or Nurse Jen, can you hang out and watch TV with me?" And she's this little 6-year-old girl. She doesn't know anything about anything. And she just remembers this, the light in her dad's eyes when he would call her Nurse Jen. And of course, she's going to grow up to be a nurse, right? And in a pediatric oncology unit, I mean, it's like unbelievable. And I'm writing the story, and her mom is just a touching character, and her friends are just amazing people. And I talk about her meeting her to-be husband, and I'm dealing with like intimate of intimate. And so, Toni, I finally write her story, right? And I say to my wife, I'm like, dude, I'm going to send her the story. She's like, she's going to love it. She's going to love it. And I'm like, oh, but I'm dealing with all these things. Like, I send it to her. And like 5 minutes later, I read it into my wife's office and I'm like, she hasn't answered me. She hates it. She's like, it's been 5 minutes. Like, give her a break. Finally, like 3 days later, she still hasn't answered. And I'm absolutely convinced that she hates me, right? Because and she writes me this long email, and finally, like a day or two later, and it was, I couldn't stop crying. I shared it with my mom. She couldn't stop crying. I shared it with my best friend. It's perfect. Don't change a word. And I'm like, because I was so anxious, right? So yeah, I kind of did that almost 15 times where I was just like, they hate me, the second I press send. But yeah, luckily the stories worked out to be what they were supposed to be.
Well, sure, that is a burden. I mean, to try to do any story justice, I think, is a burden, even in fiction. When you're creating something and you try to do it justice or capture something that, and to take 15 people's real stories that are just littered with intense emotion and trauma, and try to get that right, I think is an enormous, burden that you carried. And I thought you did, from my perspective, as a reader, I thought you did a wonderful job. I was curious as to how the 15 people felt.
Well, so 2 out of the 15 asked me if they could go anonymous because there were children involved and they didn't want the children to have to go through the tragedy of the things that they had gone through. And one of them wasn't over death. It was just issues. And the other 13 were not anonymous, and they're real people. You can look them up and send them a note and say, hey, out of the 13, I'd say probably half of them are great friends. They've turned into really, really close, good friends. And the others I have a great relationship with, and they're wonderful people. So there was no contention at the very end, right? Everybody was totally good with it, which was important because, I asked people to do this. I said, here's what I'm called to do. Here's what I want to do. I want to understand you from the inside out as deep as possible. Not so I can fix you, not so I can understand, gawk at you, not so I can tell people, oh, look, right? I just want people to be able to identify with you, have your story inspire them, evoke emotion, have them reflect on people that they know that might have gone through what you've gone through in some form or fashion. And also to make it okay to realize if you're willing to talk about the suicide of a parent or how you lost your spouse and were able to fall in love again, like these kind of real life things, then maybe possibly you could inspire people to form deeper connections with the people in their life. And they bought into that premise. And so in order to really deliver on that, we had to create a safe space to where they could just peel away everything. And then hopefully I pieced it back together in a way that kind of made it whole again, and it worked. And so, I appreciate it, and thank you for the kind words. It was the one overriding theme in the whole writing of the book was I had to get it right, because these are real people with real lives and real traumas. I didn't want to use them, or I didn't want to screw it up. Didn't want to minimize it either.
Well, let's take a minute to talk a little bit about the creative process for you. I mean, how did that work? Right? You're on your bike, you're driving around. I mean, this may sound like a silly question, but did you write as you were, stopping to interview people? Did you write on the spot? Did you take notes and then write at some point later on?
Well, yeah, let me frame it a little bit better for anybody that's listening. Is I originally talked to these people for a couple of years. There's only one that I talked to after the bike ride, but I talked to people for a couple of years. I didn't even originally plan to go on a bike ride. Okay. I didn't even, it was kind of like a gimmick. Like I thought to myself, oh, well, the wheel of emotions and if I 360 view the people's traumas and age and types of cancer, and well, it's like a wheel. Oh, like a wheels on a bike. I love doing biking. Oh, and then I thought about like one of these old timey movies where the person flies halfway across the world and this little red line follows them as they go, and I thought, oh, if we're all connected by emotion, we're connected by story, why don't I connect all these stories by biking? I'll be the thread. I'll be the red line. I'll be the thread that connects all the stories. So that's when I decided I'm going to go on the bike ride. Now I went in a zigzaggy way, California, zigzagging over to Florida and then up to New York to see as many of them. But I had already talked to them for a couple of years, but I had not met most of them. I only met a couple of them. And so I did that zigzaggy way so I could stop at some hospitals and cancer centers and also the people I had been talking to in the book. And then I met people along the way, right, that I was able to talk to. But I was biking 12, 14, 16 hours a day. I didn't have time to write, but that gave me time in my head to process the stories at a whole different level, a whole deeper level. And then, so I interviewed for a couple of years, kind of just trying to like marinate the stories. The bike ride really let me marinate them hard. And then when I got back, I began to write the book, and that took about a year. And then, like I said, I sent it to my editor and she loved it, but she said, yeah, you got to change it all. So I wrote it again. And then about 6 months later, that's when it went to the publisher. And then their editors said, no, you got to change this and this and this. And then finally it came to be.
Now, what does creativity look like for you, David? I mean, are you able to, do you need to like work out in the morning or meditate before you can sit down? Or do your fingers take on their own, just their own life, when they get behind the keyboard?
I am more like the Coelho, the alchemist writer. I'm more like him. I was listening to an interview that he had done, or maybe he had written an article. I don't remember what, but he said, here's his process. His process is every day he gets up, he gets a cup of coffee, and he sits down at his desk to write. And then he spends like the next 10 hours doing everything but avoiding writing, because as soon as he sits down, he thinks about this bookcase that's disorganized, and he thinks about the clothes he has to clean, and he thinks about the walk he needs to do, and he does everything he can to avoid writing. And then eventually 8 or 10 or 12 hours later, he finally says, all right, you can start writing. And he'll write for like 10 hours straight. Opposite that, Stephen King, right? Stephen King gets up. He says the very first thing he does before he does anything is write 10 pages, and then he goes about his day. So creativity for me is as soon as like I've got the cleanest, most organized house and life and possible, because once everything's done and organized, I can sit down to write. It's terrible. It's there. If I could change one thing in my life, it would be to really rewire my brain to make the creative process more of a priority. It's so hard.
Well, you know what I loved? I had Matthew Dix, the author, on the podcast. And what I love about some of what he said to me was that I never plan ahead. Like I can't outline my story and then follow the outline. I don't know what the characters are going to do ahead of time. I don't know the ending ahead of time. He said, I literally sit down and I go. And it's like the characters are talking to me and I just go. And he told a really great story that his, wife called in and he said, I gotta go. Like he's about to open the door. And she's like, well, what's he going to do? Is he going to, and she was like, I don't know. Like he didn't know. He had to hang up to wait for the character to tell him. Because that's how much like it just took on a life. His fingers just kind of took on a life of their own.
Yeah.
When he was writing, like the characters were just speaking to him and he would keep going. And I think there are people who create like that. And there are people who create by planning and need everything to be planned and outlined and in front of them. And they have to know ahead of time and they follow a very strict formula and they need, a cup of tea next to them and their jog in the morning. Like there's a rigidness to the process for them. And I'm always curious to find out how different people, what is their process? So what is your process?
Yeah. So I heard that interview and I started laughing because I'm exactly the same. Like I can't write out. In fact, every once in a while, if I can't figure out what's going on by the characters talking to me, I'll draw it out and I'll say, this person's
Oh,
here and what are they seeing and what are they feeling? And that person's over there. What are they seeing and what are they feeling? Because I've got to like, I'm an idiot. I literally have to write a sentence and it has to be perfect before I go to the next sentence. And I know traditionally the creative process is don't self-edit, don't stop, don't think, just let it flow and then go back, and I just can't do that, because if I'm in the middle of a dialogue and the person isn't saying exactly what they say, I can't just say, all right, come back to it and fix it later. I got to be like, no, how can I know what the next person's going to say in response if I don't have this thing perfect? So I edit as I go, and I go from point A to point B. I don't, or point A to point Z. I don't go outline it, figure it out ahead of time, fill in this little gap, go back, do this, do that. And sometimes that's a little more difficult process, because if I'm self-editing along the way and it's this beautiful flow from point A to point Z, if I've got to take something out, it really hurts because it really belongs there, but that's what a good editor does. But I do write a lot of fiction as well, and I'm exactly like him. I sit down at point A, I have no idea what's going to happen, and it just unfolds, and I never go ahead of where I'm at today. Like I got to go linearly.
well, talk to me about your fiction. I'm sorry to say, I'm a little embarrassed to say I wasn't aware that you wrote fiction.
Oh, well, yes, I just haven't published fiction, but I write fiction. And so I've got,
That's why I didn't know.
yeah, that's why you didn't know. So I have, I'm working on just a number of different books. I got this, a really, really deep book about the Greek gods. I have another one about this kind of a Fight Club meets Euphoria book, which is just awesome. And I've just got a ton of different projects that I work on at all times. But that process, even the process with Cycle of Lives and my other books before that, is I kind of got to go point A to point Z. A, B, C, D. I got to go linearly. It's just the way that my brain works.
I love that.
Can I give you an analogy? I'm a huge cook, love to cook. Okay. One of my favorite things about cooking, and I just because we're talking about it, just hit me right now. One of my favorite things about cooking is I'm a superpower when it comes to, if it's 12 or 20 or 6 different items, I can make them all come out at the same time.
Oh,
Like, that's my superpower. Like nothing's being warmed up. Nothing. We're not waiting on the one last dish. Everything is ready at exactly the same time. I think that's because I'm like, oh, I know what this step is and that step and this step on this thing and that, and I know exactly along the way everything I need to do, so it all comes out perfectly ready at the end. In fact, my family laughs because I'm like, when dinner's ready, man, it's ready, right?
well, let me say that is a great superpower. One of the better ones that I've heard.
But I don't even think about it. I just know how to do it. It's because it's point to point to point, right? I got to do this, and then the next thing I do is this, and then this, and then this, and it'll all come out perfect. If I try to do something ahead of time and make it work, it just doesn't work. It's got to go along the way. And I think my creative process with writing is very much like that.
So you have an internal clock of planning. So you may not put it down in paper, but there's a monkey in the back of your head going,
Yeah.
this. I mean, you have this internal clock that does it for you.
Yeah. Do you know, like when the Rubik's Cube first came out, right? I was always amazed because I could totally get how somebody had to stare at it for like 5 seconds and then they could go because they had to figure it out in their brain. I never understood like the start turning it and figure it out, right? I was like, oh, I got to figure. So I do that. I kind of marinate it in the back, way in the background. But I got to start it here and then take the next step, and until that's perfect, the next and the next. And that's the way my process works.
Yeah, a lot of it's happening, like you said, in your brain as you're marinating.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Well, David, so tell people, first of all, where they can get more information about you.
Sure. They can get information about me, cycleoflives.org. So the cool thing is that, that I committed to the book participants that we would give 100% of the net proceeds that come to me from the book or anything ancillary to the cancer focused organizations that they believe in and want to support. So we're a nonprofit, cyclelives.org. I do quite a bit of public speaking, creative writing stuff, and I work with about 300 different cancer focused organizations in one form or another. And a lot of that information is on the web, and it's all pretty cool. Information about what kind of things that we're doing to try to help bridge this gap between the emotional, connections. And so cyclelives.org is where they can find out the book. It's wherever books are sold. Most books are on Amazon. I don't know if you're listening to books. I love listening to audibles because I'm biking and running a lot, so I can't read. I listen to audibles, and we did the audible, and there's 15 different voiceover actors that each did one of the stories, and it's really, really, really cool. So the audible or electronic book, wherever books are sold.
Yeah, wherever books are sold, it's true. You can buy the book pretty much everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I read the physical, I say physical now, but I read everything on my Nook, right?
Right.
There's no place else to put books really for me. So I started years ago. I moved to the Nook, and that's where I get all my books digitally. But I always now keep a book or two audio, right? So that when I'm cooking or doing something where I can't physically read, I'm listening.
Well, one of these days when you circle back and want to go, I want to listen to it again, it gives it a whole nother flavor to hear a different voice for each story. I do the narrative in between, but we had a different actor do a different voice, a different character for each story. And oh man, it's really moving.
Well, now you made me wish I had absorbed it that way instead.
Well, you know what? It's evergreen. So a couple of years from now, you're gonna circle back and go, oh, I gotta listen to David's book. Yeah,
I am. Maybe sooner than a couple of years. You may have give me some marching orders.
nice.
Well, it was a pleasure to speak with you. I encourage everybody to read the book. Again, I never interview any author if I haven't read the book myself. So I did read the book. I loved the book. I encourage you to read it. You'll run the gambit of emotions. Again, my tendency, unfortunately, is I wind up reading sometimes things that are sad or even watching something sad. It's like the middle of the night for whatever reason, and I'm trying to get through, so there are some very touching moments in the book, but overall, I thought the themes were powerful and uplifting. If you really take a view of, survival and getting through and validation, there's so much here. So I highly recommend the book. Go out, get the book.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Toni. I mean, you talk to some really, powerful, important people, and they have great stories. And some of these stories in here are great. They're very, very inspirational. I only did like one thing wrong, and that is that I keep talking about a book about people's emotional journeys with cancer. And all of a sudden cancer, so sad and negative. But you're right. There's a lot of uplifting, inspiring, really optimistic, forward-thinking themes around each one of these stories. And although, like you said, some of the stories are touching, and you might need to grab a tissue every once in a while, but they're really uplifting stories and really make you believe that if people can overcome what they've overcome, then it gives you hope that you're going to be able to do the same and to connect with them in a real deep, authentic way, which is great. How's that not positive?
Really well said. Thank you, David, for joining me today.
You're welcome, Toni. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.